Welcome everyone. We are very happy to host you in this sustainability webinar for today. And before introducing our special guest, I want to give floor to our acting dean, Çağnur Balsarı. Yes.
Hi, everyone. This is the first webinar series on sustainability of the business department. I would like to welcome Richard Betts for sharing his studies and sharing his experiences with us for this event. And I think there will be some follow-up events as well on the issue. Sustainability has been an important part of our studies in Department of Business, and I hope that it will with this webinar series it will add more value to the department and to our students, because that's the world, business world, they will be surviving in when they graduate from the school. Thank you very much again.
Pleasure. Great. Great, so I can start then, can I?
Just a minute. I also want to give a few words to our head of department, Professor Banu Durukan, to welcome you.
Thank you, dear distinguished guests, dear Dean and students. Welcome to our first webinar on sustainability. So this is the first one in a series of webinars our department is organizing, and this is organized by our department's Educational Support and Development Committee. So I would like to welcome also Richard Betts, KPMG Sustainability Services Director, and thank him for giving us the opportunity to host him. Sustainability is very important for businesses today, and we have seen that businesses who have focused on sustainability are doing much better, performing better in the business world, and it's becoming even more important part of the strategy for businesses. And so I will not take too long, because I think we have we will be hearing very interesting things from Mr. Betts. But before I leave the floor to him, I would like to thank Professor Dr. Esra Aslanertik, Associate Professor Dr. Banu Demirel, and our assistants, Sevgi Emirza, İlayda İpek, and Elif Korkmaz for for the organization of this webinar. And I would also like to thank the Dean's Office for their support, because we are going live on YouTube with this webinar. And I wish everyone a fruitful and a successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, let me introduce you a little bit before the beginning.
Thank you.
We are very pleased to introduce you our special guest from KPMG, Richard Betts, for today's sustainability webinar. Richard is, as Professor Durukan says, Richard is Director of Sustainability Services at KPMG, and he is also a recognized international expert in sustainability, and he has a wide range of experience on different areas and 15 years of experience with Big Four consultancy companies. He is also a chartered accountant, and he is a CPA at the same time, and he has different or several studies on areas of expertise within sustainability, including the sustainability reporting and assurance, IRRC, integrated reporting advisory, climate change, low carbon transformation, sustainability strategy and implementation, sustainability performance improvement, sustainable finance, sustainable bonds, and environmental due diligence. And before moving to Istanbul, Richard lived in the United Kingdom, Italy, and Mexico. He has a dual UK and Turkish nationality and speaks 8 languages. He has extensive experience in sustainability across many sectors, including finance, food and beverage, cement, glass manufacturing, telecommunication, energy, holdings, and retail. Now I want to give floor to Richard. Welcome once more.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for all the introductions and all the nice comments. And well, it's a pleasure to be with you today and to talk about sustainability. I've prepared a short presentation that we're going to go through, but hoping that this can be interactive. So hoping that we can have some discussion on the topics, and so I do invite questions if people are interested in knowing more about particular areas. Great. Okay, so let's start then. And Esther, you're going to help me through the slide. Yeah. Great. Okay. So first of all, we'll look at some context. I'll just give some sort of quick definitions regarding sustainability. We'll look at some global trends. Then we'll look at sort of the situation in Turkey. And I'll give some case study examples around sustainability and non-financial reporting. So firstly, and I understand that we have a mix of backgrounds and sort of areas of knowledge attending today. So firstly, just in terms of some sort of definitions, I mean, there are different definitions that have been used regarding sustainability, but very basically, what we're really getting at is the need to move to a systems approach, and in our prevailing economic model, in our prevailing paradigm, if you will, we've tended to focus on the short-term impacts, the short-term direct financial impacts and costs. We've tended to consider certain stakeholder groups, such as companies' management, investors, shareholders, but we've only been looking at a small part of a much bigger picture. And with sustainability, we need to consider the total picture, if you like, the sort of the systems approach, whereby we're no longer considering just the short-term direct financial impacts, but we're also considering longer-term impacts. We're also considering indirect impacts. We're also considering non-financial impacts, and we're also considering other stakeholder groups in addition to investors, shareholders, such as customers, employees, local communities, and so this is sort of basically what we're talking about. A new paradigm focused on taking a systems approach. And in that diagram there, you see some examples of issues that can be considered within sustainability, and you can see how they've been split into different categories. So economic issues, and when we talk about economic sustainability, yes, we're focusing on the the sustainable. By economic sustainability, we're looking at whether sort of the economic practices can be sustained. So, for example, is a company paying a fair share of taxes? Is a company paying its suppliers on time? Is a company paying its employees a fair living wage? These kind of issues. And then you'll see environmental issues such as climate change, waste management, energy consumption, natural capital issues, and social issues such as human rights issues, health and safety. And so often in sustainability, really for really for sort of ease of management, they often get sort of compartmentalized in such a way where topics get split into economic, environmental, social, ESG, and okay, it makes it sort of easier to address to a certain point and to sort of understand what we're talking about. But we have to remember, as I said, sustainability is about taking a systems approach, because we live in a globalized economy. We live in a highly interconnected planetary system, and there are many interconnections between different issues. And so we must not think about these issues in isolation. There are many interconnections between them, and I'll give some examples as we move on to the next slides. So Esther, can we go to the next slide, please?
Of course.
So now let's sort of start moving towards more specific examples then. So why is sustainability important? Well, just as one example, every year the World Economic Forum publishes an annual risk report, and every year they undertake interviews with experts around the world to get their views on what the top risks are facing the global economy over the next 10 years. And they've been doing this for the last 15 years. And in this extract, you can see what the top experts rated the top 5 risks as being in terms of likelihood to the global economy over the next 10 years. So you can see that in the early years of these risk reports from the World Economic Forum, there were a lot of risks which in a way might seem sort of more traditional risks around sort of economic issues, the price of oil. There's some sort of political, economic risks, but you can see how the risk profile has changed very significantly in the last few years. And you can see how most of the top risks in the last few years are green, environmental risks. And indeed, in 2020, the top 5 risks were all assessed as being climate-related environmental risks in terms of likelihood. They also do another analysis which looks at risks by impact, sort of by magnitude. And in the impact assessment, again, most of the top risks were rated as being climate-related or sustainability risks. So risks such as risk connected to climate change, water scarcity, and the only risk in the impact category that wasn't a climate-related, that wasn't an environmental risk, was weapons of mass destruction, sort of nuclear war. That was rated as the second in terms of impact. So not in terms of likelihood, probability, not in terms of likelihood, but obviously if it happened, it would be, you know, a planetary level major risk in terms of impact. But even that was rated secondary to climate change failure. So I think that's quite telling, really, that so according to the top experts, by likelihood, all of the top risks to the global economy over the next 10 years were assessed as being climate-related environmental risks. In terms of impact, most were also environmental risks. Let's look at the next page, please. This is another extract from the risk report, from the World Economic Forum risk report, and what this shows is just a point I touched on earlier, how top risks are very interconnected with other areas. They don't operate in isolation. I don't know how clearly you can see in this diagram, but on the left of this figure, you'll see infectious diseases. And the risk report came out before COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic. It came out in January, at the start of the year. And so we did have infectious diseases in the sort of the top risks. It was in the top 10, not one of the top 5. But what you'll see in that figure is how the risks are connected to many other kinds of risks. And you know, we've all seen this year how that's been the case with COVID-19, how some risks, problems in another part of the world have led to planetary level economic health risks for all of us. So it's just sort of one example of how these risks don't operate in isolation, and how, you know, many of the top risks facing us now are systemic risks. And really, this is at the heart of so much of sustainability, that many of these top risks facing us now are systemic risks. So COVID-19 is a systemic risk. Climate change is a systemic risk. Natural capital risks are also systemic risks. And let's look at the next page. We can see that in a bit more detail. So this is an example from a recent UN report, and it's you know, there've been a lot of scientific studies that have come out recently that highlight the connections between unsustainable practices such as environmental degradation, such as wildlife trafficking, and an increased risk of infectious diseases and pandemics. So, you know, COVID-19, so, you know, an infectious zoonotic disease, so, you know, a disease that's been passed from animals to humans. And, you know, obviously it's, again, these things don't operate in isolation. So it's extremely difficult to, you know, to pinpoint, to identify a sole risk, you know, factor, a sole root cause for something like a global pandemic. You know, it's clear there are a lot of contributing factors, but the science is clear that the risk of infectious diseases, the risk of diseases such as COVID-19, has increased, is greatly increasing due to unsustainable practices such as environmental degradation and wildlife trafficking, because you know, we're removing the natural buffer that has separated us from, in this case, dangerous pathogens to which humans haven't evolved any defense mechanisms against. So by removing the natural buffer, by chopping down the trees, by taking exotic species from those areas into markets, we're coming into contact with a lot of pathogens to which we haven't come into contact with before, and so as a result, we're exposing ourselves to new pathogens, and this is a big part of the reason why the risk of infectious diseases is increasing. So the science makes it clear that under this sort of trajectory, if we carry on removing the natural buffer, taking more and more species from their wildlife habitats, just destroying those habitats, well, the risk of another pandemic, the risk of more infectious diseases spreading to humans will increase. And also, science also makes clear that with global warming, with climate change, pandemic risk will also increase. For example, under the current trajectory, there is a high risk that the permafrost, just as one example, the permafrost in the Arctic will start to melt at scale, and that microorganisms, pathogens that have been trapped in the permafrost, that have been sort of there latently for a very long time, will be released into the atmosphere if global warming continues unabated. So, this is an example of how a lot of these top risks are interconnected. So how climate change can increase the risk of pandemics, how biodiversity risks can increase the risk of pandemics. So, this is why it's so important with sustainability to take a systems approach and look at things together and not in isolation. Great. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So let's just sort of think about some of the other challenges that we're faced with at the moment. So we have climate change, and so just in terms of climate change, we know that the Earth's climate has changed throughout Earth's geological history, but now there is unanimous scientific consensus that since the start of the Industrial Revolution, we humans have been causing anthropogenic global warming, and that since the start of the Industrial Revolution, so around the middle of the 18th century, since the start of the Industrial Revolution, we've warmed the average temperature of the planet by over 1 degree Celsius as a global average, due to essentially due to two main things: due to the wide-scale combustion of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, which have released enormous amounts of CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and through the greenhouse effect have caused the Earth's temperature to rise. And secondly, due to major alteration of the of the sort of configuration of land use globally through wide-scale deforestation, we've deforested large parts of the world's forests. We've burned those trees, and they have released all of the carbon that they contained into the atmosphere. So through fossil fuel combustion and through major land use change, we've changed the Earth's climate. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, the Earth's average temperature is now between 1 to 1.1 degrees C warmer than at the start of the Industrial Revolution. That doesn't sound a lot, but that's a global average, and some areas are warming, have been warming a lot faster than other areas. In general, land areas have been warming about twice the rate of the oceans, and the poles have been heating up the most of all. This has been contributing to major loss of ice at both the North and South Poles. And the scientific consensus now is that we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C temperature rise, and all the statistics that they give are always shown relative to the start of the Industrial Revolution. So right now we're between 1 and 1.1 degrees Celsius as a global average. For a long time, the priority was to limit global warming to 2 degrees C of global warming. But there was a very influential scientific report that came out in 2018, the IPCC special report, and that basically said, 2 degrees of global warming is too risky. We must be more ambitious. We must do better than that. We must limit global warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial temperatures. So in other words, that's another half a 0.4 to 0.5 degrees over where we currently are. And they said, based on the current trajectory, it's likely that the world would hit that threshold of 1.5 degrees warming by 2030, and hence we really need rapid transformational change now in the next few years to take us off that trajectory. And when you look at the scientific reports, there are different scenarios of global warming, and obviously there's lots of factors, but basically the general consensus has been that right now, and despite all of the initiatives, improvements that have been achieved around sustainability, around renewable energy, despite all of the progress today, right now we're heading for over 3 degrees of warming this century. And then there are there's like the worst case scenarios, which put us at 5 to 6 degrees C of global warming this century. But the general consensus at the moment is that, currently we're heading for 3 to 3.5. And again, the overwhelming scientific consensus is that we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And I think it's been very clear in the last couple of years that actually we have a problem now. For a long time, climate change seemed like a future problem to most people, an issue that didn't seem very relevant to their busy daily lives, and it seemed sort of vague and sort of distant in the future. But you know, in the last couple of years, we've seen unprecedented bushfires in Australia, in California, wide-scale fires in the Amazon region in South America, unprecedented melting in the Arctic, record fires in Siberia. And so I think it's brought it home to a lot of people that actually we have a problem now. We're no longer talking about a problem in the future. We're talking about a problem that's affecting that is affecting us right now, and therefore a problem that we need to deal with now. So I think that's you know, that's sort of helped create enormous momentum in this area, and we'll come on to that in a few slides time. So we have some major problems around climate change, and just sort of one last comment on this is a big part of the reason why the scientists say we need to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees is because the Earth has a very complex interconnected planetary system, and the worry is that there are a lot of feedback loops in the Earth's planetary systems, and the worry is that with global warming, we can tip the Earth's climate from a broadly stable climatic system to an unstable one, an unstable system where we would then have accelerating runaway global warming, and that we then wouldn't be able to control. So for example, a feedback loop could be as the temperatures rise, the permafrost in Siberia starts to melt at scale, and right now under the permafrost there is enormous amounts of methane gas that is currently trapped under the permafrost, and methane is an extremely powerful greenhouse gas. It is many times more powerful than CO2, which is the most widely known greenhouse gas. It's 25 times more powerful, more potent than CO2 over a 100-year period. It has a much shorter half-life, so actually most of its warming is achieved over just a 20-year period. So actually it's far more powerful than CO2. Currently, enormous amounts of methane gas are stored under the permafrost in the Northern Hemisphere. And so the scientists are worried that with global warming, the permafrost will start to melt at scale, and the methane gas currently trapped under the Earth's permafrost will be released into the atmosphere, accelerating global warming. And this is how you can get like a feedback loop with accelerating global warming. So they're saying we need to limit it to 1.5 degrees, so we minimize the risk of something of one of these sort of negative feedback loops kicking in, such as around permafrost melting in the northern atmosphere, or such as the sort of tipping the Amazon rainforest from a tropical rainforest biome to a savanna biome, and whereby there'd be massive loss of carbon from the rainforests. So this is climate change, but it's not the only issue that we need to. Sorry, I'll just talk about a couple of others quickly, please. Yeah, can we just go back to the previous slide? Yeah, thanks. So there's climate change. We also have other sustainability issues that we need to deal with, such as ocean pollution. So right now there's a major problem around plastic waste. Right now, latest estimates indicate that by mid-century, there could be more plastic by volume than fish in the sea. And plastic has a lot of toxic chemicals in it, and so big risks here around when the plastic gets broken up in the sea into sort of microplastics. It then gets ingested by fish. We then eat the fish, and so what are the sort of long-term health implications if we're eating lots of plastic and toxic chemicals? And it shows how an example of an unsustainable model whereby we can drink we can drink a bottle of water in a plastic bottle, and we can drink the water in maybe a minute or 2 minutes, but then that plastic bottle that we used for 1 minute, well, that'll be there for centuries. Unless it's disposed of properly, it will still be there in centuries time. And the latest statistics indicate that more than 90% of the plastic that's ever been produced hasn't been recycled. Most has gone to landfill, and an enormous amount, millions of tons of plastic is being released into the world's oceans every year. And at present, the production of plastic is increasing rapidly. So this is a big problem. And also linked to climate change, the oceans of the world are warming up. They're also becoming more acidic, also linked to one of the impacts of global warming. And the increased acidity is impacting marine life, causing some marine species to die off. So there are big issues around ocean pollution in terms of plastic waste, in terms of acidification, to give 2 examples. These are sort of global issues, really. There are also sustainability issues that are very significant at a more local level, such as around water scarcity. So you can see there an example from India that within 10 years' time, the demand for fresh water in India projected to be twice the available supply. So a lot of parts of the world are already facing water scarcity risks, and on the current trajectory, this is due to increase as the demand for water increases with a rapidly increasing global population and increased demand for industry. So we have key issues around water scarcity, water pollution, water availability that we need to address. And so many of these issues are interconnected. So water scarcity risks become more acute with global warming. As temperatures rise, increased risk of droughts, this kind of thing. We also have big risks around soil, and latest studies indicate that the world has lost 50% of topsoil. So that's the sort of the fertile top layer that's essential for agriculture in the last half century, and how topsoil is vital to agriculture, how it can take a very long time to form, but how we've been losing it at a rapid rate, and there have been recent studies that have indicated that under the current trajectory, the world has enough topsoil left for maybe up to 60 harvests. So this is also a major issue, and obviously, within the context of a rapidly increasing global population, where we actually, when we need more from agriculture and more from the soil, well, we're losing it very unsustainably. Then there are major issues around biodiversity, and there have been influential reports that have come out in the last couple of years indicating how species are going extinct at the rate of at least 1,000 times, and probably much higher than that, the natural level. So this issues around biodiversity are becoming very very high profile. So up until 2 or 3 years ago, there was a lot more focus on certain other areas such as climate change. There's still all of that focus, but within the last couple of years, there's been some really very influential scientific reports that have come out around biodiversity, around risks connected to natural capital, and now we're seeing a lot of momentum really starting to build in this area. I'll talk a bit more about this in a later slide. But it just, my last comment on that is how we need to remember that we live in a highly interconnected planetary systems, as I keep saying, and so I think in our modern hectic urbanized world, we've lost the direct connection to biodiversity. Throughout most of human history, people lived with nature. Most people lived in the countryside. Most people were farmers, and people were surrounded by nature. And then in recent decades, obviously we had the Industrial Revolution, with people starting to move towards the towns, something that started in my Memleket. But this has really accelerated in the last few decades, and now the majority of the world's population is now living in urban areas, and this is a trend that's due to increase only further, with 70% of the world's population expected to be living in urban areas by mid-century. And so many of us have lost this connection to the natural world. We no longer get the food from our field. Most of us no longer have animals. Most of us no longer grow crops. Most of us get food from the supermarket, and it's like we've sort of we've lost this connection with the natural world. We've overlooked just how important it is to us all, because actually we all need the natural world for everything. All of our food, all of our water, the air we breathe, all of it and everything comes from the natural world. And it's no coincidence that the word economy has the same prefix as the word ecology. They have the same the same root, because in the sort of ancient times, the basic block of life was seen as the oikos, from which the prefix eco came, and that sort of basic block, oikos, encapsulated the family, the home, and the sort of surrounding environments. And so the point is, without ecology, without nature, there can be no economy. So it's great to see all this momentum now building around biodiversity and climate change issues, because, yeah, as I said a couple of slides back, these are the top issues facing the economy, and indeed facing all of us. So let's go on, please. Okay, so let's look at a bit in terms of sort of the policy landscape. So around 5 years ago, towards the end of 2015, essentially all of the countries around the world committed to greatly reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. This is known as the Paris Agreement. And since then, nearly all of the countries around the world have ratified the Paris Agreement. The US has recently left the Paris Agreement, but assuming Joe Biden is confirmed the next US president in January, the US will be coming back into the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement, has been a very important first step. For the first time, we have essentially a global climate accord with essentially all of the countries around the world committing to reduce their emissions. Since then, there's been sort of important updates with developing more detail, but there's a lot further to go with this. But it's important as for its sort of long-term market signal that it gives, sort of in sort of showing to companies and citizens around the world that this is important, because all of the global, essentially all the countries around the world have committed to it, and nearly all have now ratified it. So the Paris Agreement has been important. Around a similar time, we also saw the agreement on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and these are these were what were agreed as being the global priorities until 2030. So you can see some of them there. There are global goals around climate action, around equality, education, lots of other issues. So they're also very important in providing a global framework for countries and also companies to align with, to show how what they're doing is contributing to the global priorities. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now I thought, so in the first section we looked at sort of some of the issues, some of the problems. Now we'll sort of start moving towards some of the solutions. Let's look a bit at the area of reporting. So let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So sustainable reporting, essentially where companies report on their performance and their impacts in their main areas, and this has become very common in the last few years. let's go on to the next page so we can see a bit more detail. So yeah, you'll see there's been a rapid increase in reporting. So the first sort of standalone sustainability reports were published around the time of the early 90s. But over the last few years, there's been a rapid increase in reporting. So now there are many thousands of companies that are publishing sustainability reports on an annual basis. There are different names that are used sometimes for the reporting, different frameworks, as we'll come on to in a next slide. But essentially, yeah, studies have indicated many thousands, over 10,000 companies that have published sustainability type reports now. And in Turkey, there's now around 200 Turkish companies that are publishing sustainability type reports on a regular basis, and that's been a huge increase in just a few years. When I can remember, when I first started looking at the situation in Turkey several years ago, 7-8 years ago, there was only a handful of Turkish companies that were publicly reporting on their sustainability performance and impacts. And so we've gone from a handful, so 5 to 10 companies that were reporting 7 or 8 years ago, to around 200 now. So this has been a rapid increase in Turkey and also internationally. Let's come to the next page, please. As I touched on, there are different frameworks that are in use around sustainability. On this page, you see some of the main frameworks, standards that are in use. So, for example, there's GRI, and GRI is has been the most popular form of sustainability reporting used globally and in Turkey. So a bit akin to IFRS in the financial reporting world, that studies have indicated that around two-thirds of companies that have been publishing their sustainability reports have been following GRI. So GRI has been around for several years. We'll look at GRI in more detail in a next slide. But so GRI is very popular in Turkey and globally, and is currently the most popular set of standards used in Turkey and globally. Then you have the UNGC, the UN Global Compact, which provides sort of 10 key principles for companies to address, to measure their performance, and then to report on their performance and to commit to improvement. And these 10 principles are split into 4 main areas, such as principles around environmental commitment, labour, and other areas. So companies should report on an annual basis for their UNGC performance, their sort of the so-called commitment on progress. But that, some companies will do that through a GRI sustainability report. So there are different standards, there are different frameworks, but to a large extent they can often be integrated into one report. So different metrics can be included from GRI, from UN, GC principles, and from other areas. So we often see them addressed through one report. Then there's CDP. So CDP started off as the Carbon Disclosure Project because it was focused on climate change. Since then, it started additional initiatives around water, forestry, supply chain programs. So it's no longer exclusively focused on climate change, but it is the main global platform for companies to report on their environmental performance in these key areas around climate change and water. The companies are rated, and their rating is made publicly available, this is becoming increasingly important for many investors, that when they're looking to see whether they should invest in a company, increasingly they're looking for not just the traditional financial metrics, but also non-financial metrics. And one important source of information on the non-financial side would be a company's CDP rating. CDP also publishes a global A rating, where it publishes all of the companies that manage to get an A level globally. So these are very sort of high profile globally, and CDP has also been important in Turkey. In Turkey, it launched 10 years ago, and there's been a substantial increase in recent years. So there's now around 50 Turkish companies that are reporting on an annual basis to CDP on their climate performance, their climate data, performance and impacts, and also most of them report around their water performance and impacts. So around 50 companies in Turkey, mainly the large Turkish listed companies from the Borsa, from the BIST 100, and then there's also a few companies from outside the BIST 100 that also report on a voluntary basis. So, but around 50. You can see there also the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As we said, they were agreed as being the global priorities a few years ago, and so a lot of companies have been working on aligning their reporting and also their strategies with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So this is another area that can be integrated within companies' sustainability reports, and this can be very powerful. It can help a company show to its investors, to its other stakeholders, how it's contributing positively to the top issues facing all of us by aligning what it's doing with the global priorities, with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And then the other area, the one I left to last, integrated reporting. So integrated reporting has in the last year or so has become really very popular in Turkey. It was launched by the IARC, the International Integrated Reporting Council. They published their IR framework in 2013, In South Africa, it's mandated for the listed companies. So very popular in South Africa, very popular in Japan, and then quite a lot of European companies from India, Australia, also report. So internationally, yes, it has become important, and in particular in certain countries such as Japan, South Africa, and in Turkey now. This is a real hot topic area, and essentially it is a framework. It is a conceptual framework that was developed to meet investor demand, to help investors understand how a company creates value and how a company destroys value for its investors and other stakeholders. So the focus of the integrated reporting framework is on value creation. And it was, as I said, it was developed primarily to meet investor needs. Investors and other stakeholders were getting sort of frustrated by the ever more onerous reporting requirements that were coming through, with more and more disclosure requirements, with reports getting longer and longer. It was getting harder for investors to sort of find the really important, the key strategic information that they wanted for investment grade decision making, and companies were also finding it more and more time consuming in having to prepare lots of different reports to meet lots of different standards, and so the IR framework was created to meet investor demand and for a business report that would help a company to articulate its value creation for investors and other stakeholders over the short to long term. So it's meant to be a much more strategic document than other standards. I mean, other standards such as GRI, such as IFRS, they are prescriptive in that they provide the indicators that a company needs to report on. The IR framework doesn't provide any mandatory disclosures. What it does, it is a principles-based framework whereby it explains the key principles that a company should integrate and address in order to be able to articulate its value creation process. And then it says at a secondary level that the value creation process should be communicated in a way that will be meaningful to investors and other stakeholders, and for that it should report by using international standards and guidelines. So very often what we see is that we see companies preparing integrated reports to explain their business model, their strategy, their impacts, but still using a lot of content from other frameworks such as GRI, such as CDP, because they will report the specific KPIs relevant to their value creation model using GRI indicators or IFRS indicators. So really, in the IR framework, when used well, can be, in my opinion, like an effective vehicle, a conceptual framework for explaining a company's value proposition, and by leveraging the content, the good practice material from these other standards that have been developed, such as GRI and CDP. Okay, let's go to the next page, please. Yeah, so just a bit more information on GRI. As we said, it's the most widely used internationally, also in Turkey. There have been different iterations. What we currently have are the GRI standards. For the GRI standards, there are basically sort of two main categories. There are the universal standards, which you see on the left, these ones with the sort of the numbers starting with 100, 101, 102, etc. They provide the the general disclosures which all companies should report on. They help to explain what a company does, what its operations are, so that a reader can understand, can have a sort of a decent understanding as to what a company does, so that it can understand what a company's impacts are likely to be based on what industry the company's operating in, what its operations are, and these kind of points. And then there are these topic-specific standards. So there are standards around economic sustainability issues, environmental sustainability issues, social sustainability issues. So as an example, within the environmental series, there is there are then standards that specifically focus on climate change, on greenhouse gas emissions, others that focus on energy, on water and effluent, and the like. And in GRI, the point is that all companies should report on the universal standards, and then a company should do a materiality assessment, whereby it identifies the key issues, the most material issues to the company and to the company's key stakeholder groups. And based on that assessment of what the most material issues are, that's what the company should then report on in its report. So there's sort of this two-tiered approach, if you like. Okay, let's go on to the next page, please. Okay, integrated reporting. So I talked about that a couple of slides ago, but we can go into a bit more detail now. Let's look at the next page, please. This slide here just provides some of the sort of the context as to why investors were demanding broader information. So you can see in the graph how there's been a major change in sort of the composition of companies' market value in recent decades. So you can see how just a few decades ago, so 1975, just 17% of companies of the big S&P listed companies' market value was based on intangible assets, and how it's kind of that ratio is now inverted, with only sort of just 13% in 2015 of companies of the same company, the same listed companies, the S&P 500 listed companies market value, only 13% being from the tangible assets in 2015. The large majority of it coming from intangible assets, and so most of the value not being sort of picked up, reported in companies' traditional financial reporting. There are big, there are sort of a lot of restrictions as to what companies can sort of what companies can include as assets using the IFRS financial reporting rules in terms of intangible assets. A lot of restrictions as to what can be recognised as an asset, and so investors were increasingly feeling that there were big gaps in terms of companies' impacts that were not being reflected in the traditional reports. And it links to this sort of my earlier comment about how integrated reporting is, in one sentence, integrated reporting is trying to answer the exam question. The exam question is, how does this company create value? How does this company create value for its investors and other stakeholders over the short to long term? And how does it create or destroy value? But essentially, it is focused on value creation. And so the traditional reports, the sentiment was that the traditional reports were not capturing, were not articulating an increasingly significant portion of the company's value creation. There was an increasing gap there, also in terms of value destruction. It links to what we saw earlier when we looked at the World Economic Forum risk report, where we saw that there's been a big change in the top risks that are facing the economy, companies, all of us. How top risks now are assessed as being climate-related environmental risks. Well, until very recently, when you looked at companies reporting on risks in their annual reports, they were talking about risks such as liquidity risks, forex risks, but you wouldn't see anything, most of them around climate risk. You wouldn't see anything about other environmental risks. And yet the experts are telling us that these are the top risks facing the economy, facing the company, and yet they're not mentioned in the annual reports. And so, obviously these are important drivers for why we're seeing this proliferation of reporting around non-financial reporting, on reporting around areas such as climate change. And I think it's on the next slide, so I'll it's going to be on the next slide, so I won't mention it now. Okay, I'll talk about this slide. I know there's another slide coming up, so let's talk about this slide then. So so we said with integrated reporting, we're trying to address, we're trying to articulate the company's value creation process. We said it's principles based, so it does not mandate specific disclosures. It gives principles, and you see there on the left the main the principles, these 7 guiding principles, which every report should adhere to in order to be for it to be considered an IIRC integrated report. It should follow these 7 guiding principles, and then on the right hand the 8 content elements, and then there are a few 19 there are 19 other topics that should be reported on. So there are these three areas. So in terms of the guiding principles, you see strategy, strategic focus, and future orientation. So integrated reporting focuses a lot on forward-looking information, on helping a company to articulate its strategy, and so this is, so if you look in the in the sort of the Folio report or in the traditional annual reports, you will see yes, there is for sure there, yes, there is forward-looking information. You'll see some of the financial data will have been prepared by integrating forward-looking projections. So, for example, in terms of IS 37 around liabilities, companies have to assess their sort of their best estimate of an exposure to a liability. So yes, obviously there is some incorporation of future outlook and forward-looking projections, and yes, companies will sort of have a section on future outlook in the sort of in the management commentary near the start of the report, where they'll focus on the short-term future outlook for the next year or so. But with integrated reporting, there's much more of a forward-looking information and a longer time frame. So not just in the short term, but through to the long term. So more strategic in this sense. The traditional reporting has tended to be mainly historic, whereby most of the focus was on what happened what happened this year and what happened last year, and obviously that's all very important information. But if you're an investor, you want to know that, but you also want to know what's likely to happen next year and what's likely to happen in the next few years. And so for that reason, there is a lot more focus on forward-looking strategic information, a lot more on future plans, a lot more on future targets, a lot more on KPIs for the short through to long term. You'll see a lot more. So then we have connectivity of information, and the point here is a company should explain its business model. So how does it create value, and it should show how it creates value from the different functions within the organization, and what the connectivity between those different functions are, what the connectivity is between the different inputs and the subsequent outputs. So when you look on the right, you'll see things like so we have so to give an example, we have materiality on the left. You see materiality as a guiding principle. So the point is a company should assess its material issues. So what are the material issues that can affect its value creation potential for the short to long term? What that in effect means is what could impact the company's what could impact the company's future cash flows. And based on the materiality assessment, that then should be linked to the strategy. So to say, well, okay, these are the key issues according to the company, according to the stakeholder groups. These are the most material issues. So now we need to design strategic responses to these material issues. So there needs to be a connection between materiality and the strategy. There needs to be a connectivity between the strategy and the governance, because a company's governance function should have the remit of monitoring the implementation of the strategy to make sure that the company's on track to achieve its strategic priorities. So there should also be connectivity between strategy and governance. There should be connectivity between strategy and risks and opportunities. So the material issues should be linked to the risks and opportunities which should be linked to the strategy. So that there needs to be a connection between these different areas. And in big companies, things often can happen in silo. So a big sort of part of the value creation through switching to integrated reporting is in helping to break down these silos to look at the holistic value creation across an organization. So connectivity, important. Focus on materiality, as I said, also very important. Focus on stakeholder relationships, very important. And so quite a few of these guiding principles are, broadly speaking, common to other important frameworks and standards, such as the idea of materiality. Well, you'll see that in all of them. You'll see that in GRI. You'll see that in the financial reporting, IFRS. You'll see it in all of the main standards. So it's not something that's unique to integrated reporting. There's a bit of a difference in that as we said, the primary focus of integrated reporting is on value creation over the short to the long term. And so, for materiality, that means there should be a longer term consideration of material issues of materiality. And for the traditional reporting, companies have tended to focus on the very short term, to think, well, what are the key issues right now? What could affect us next year? But not to sort of look very far beyond that, not to sort of think, well, what could impact us in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? Through IR, as we said, it's a lot more strategic. We need to think short through to long term. So we should also be thinking about the sort of the future trends. So for companies in Turkey, for example, that could mean sort of doing a horizon scanning to look at what are the key issues, maybe not affecting companies in Turkey at the moment, but what are the big issues that are affecting a particular sector globally? What do we see the emerging trends as being? They can give sort of important insights as to what are likely to be important issues for Turkey and Turkish companies in a few years' time. So we have these guiding principles that the company should align with. And then you see on the other side, as I said, the content elements. So every report needs to explain its business model. It needs to explain its main risks and opportunities, how it's managing those risks and opportunities, how it's sort of working to mitigate those risks, convert them into opportunities, how it's looking to leverage those opportunities. So these are the sort of the basic building blocks of an integrated report, these core principles and these sort of mandatory content elements. Let's go on to the next page. Another key aspect of integrated reporting is the idea of capitals, and in the IR framework, it explains 6 capitals, which you see there: financial capital, human capital, manufacturing capital, and the others. The framework doesn't mandate every company to report on each of those 6 capitals. They're given us as examples, whereby the basic point is that a company should look across its operations, its activities, across all of its impacts, in order to form a broader view on what its total impacts are, and limited not just to sort of financial issues, which are obviously what have dominated the traditional reporting, but to also consider these other areas such as human capital, natural capital. In practice, you'll see, and now there are many hundreds of companies globally that have prepared integrated reports. So in practice, you'll see most of those reports using these 6 different capitals, but you'll also see some where they've also identified additional capitals, or they've only reported on 5 of these 6 because they claim that one of them is not ever so relevant, or because they don't have much data. So there can be some differences, but essentially, the point is the company shouldn't limit itself to just considering its financial impacts, but it should look more broadly and across its activities to consider the broader impacts. And so that a capital really is like a stock of value, and the point is that every company uses these stocks of value. So in terms of financial capital, every company has sort of financial inputs. In terms of human capital, every company has employees and has capital inputs that it starts with in terms of manufactured capital, natural capital, etc., etc. And then through a company's business activities, it creates its products and its services, and it has an impact on those capitals. And so those capitals, they get increased or decreased based on what a company does. And so, with integrated is an example of the connectivity principle, which I explained a few minutes ago. So another example can be, in terms of connectivity, the connectivity between different capitals. So we see financial capital and human capital. So a really basic example would be, if a company invests in training for its workforce, it can increase human capital with a more educated, more skilled workforce. So human capital goes up, and financial capital goes down in the short term due to financial costs connected to the training. But then, more longer term, financial capital would be expected to go up if the employees are happy, if they feel satisfied, contented at work, they're more likely to be, if example there. So with integrated reporting, companies are asked to consider these relationships between the capitals. So assess, what are the capitals it's using? So what kinds of natural capital does a company use? And then, what are the impacts on the other capitals, and what are the sort of the flows of value between different capitals, and even sort of within a capital from business operations. Okay, let's go on to the next page. So there you see the value creation process. This is kind of central to integrated reporting. It draws on a lot of what I've just been talking about. You see in the middle, you see the business model. You see on the left the capitals, financial, manufactured, etc. So again, the company has inputs from these different capitals. It turns those inputs into its outputs through its activities, operations. And you can see how, the different sort of functions, should be contributing to the value creation process, as we said, with governance, for example, monitoring the implementation of the strategy, risks and opportunities should be linked to strategy, etc., etc. So, okay, let's move on. Oh yeah, so on this slide, I just wanted to sort of give a bit more context here. So there you see examples of the different capitals. You see on the left, we start with financial capital, and the example there is how double entry bookkeeping, that sort of arose towards the end of the 15th century in Venice, around the time that Christopher Columbus was rediscovering the Americas. We had sort of the development of double entry bookkeeping, debits and credits, and so a focus on financial capital. I mean, before double entry bookkeeping, for centuries before then, yes, people were recording some forms of financial capital, but yeah, by the end of the 15th century, we have development of double entry bookkeeping, and the first focus is on financial capital. Then as we move on in time, we come to the Industrial Revolution, which happened, as you said, middle of the 18th century, initially in the UK. And we had sort of major production, and so then a lot of production related KPIs became very important to monitor and report on, and so in addition to all of the financial information, which obviously still remained very, very important, manufactured capital became important. Fast forward a couple of hundred years towards the end of the 20th century, and then we had the dot-com boom, and the advent of computers and software and the information technology, and so intellectual capital, human capital, they also became very important. And then more recently, it's become extremely clear that natural capital and the social relationship capital are also very important. Obviously, this is at the the sort of the heart of sustainability, linked to what we saw in the World Economic Forum risk slide that I showed. How now most of the top risks now are environmental risks, so these sort of natural capital points. So now we get to this point where all of these different capitals are now important. So financial capital is still obviously very important, but now it's no longer enough just to report on financial capital. Companies need to be understanding, assessing, reporting on many other areas, including natural capital, and really with natural capital, I suppose the point is well, really the point on this slide is that what worked at one point in history, when we look back through history, we can see different economic models, different economic systems that were successful at a time in history, but then as circumstances changed, what had previously been a successful system could no longer be sort of maintained in that way. But change was needed because the circumstances changed, and this is the basic point around sustainability and around sort of natural capital, around climate-related environmental issues, and that our prevailing system is essentially a linear system. We mine something, we manufacture it, we consume it, and then there's waste as a byproduct. And then we start all over again, mining new material, clearing land, and then the process carries on that way. And you know, in the past, we could get away with that because there were a lot less people on the planet, and our collective footprint was a lot smaller than it is today. But in recent decades, the circumstances have changed. There's been a rapid increase in the global population. There's been a rapid increase in the size of the global economy. And so as a result, we're already exceeding the planetary boundaries for key resources in key areas. We're at risk of exceeding the planetary boundaries in other key areas. And so we cannot continue with the previous model, with the linear model, because we're already exceeding the planetary boundaries in many areas. We're running out of resources, and so, you know, to build a successful, sustainable economy, that's why we urgently need the transition to, you know, a new paradigm, a new business model focused on sustainability, where, you know, in the case of linear models, so instead of linear models, we need to move to circular models, whereby the output, the waste from one process becomes the input for a new process. You know, there we can take a leaf out of you know, sort of nature's book. When you look at the natural world, actually you see lots of circularity. There's lots of cycles, from, you know, the water cycle to the nitrogen cycle of life and death. There are cycles everywhere. That's what happens in the natural world. That's the way evolution has evolved. And so, you know, due to these sort of fundamental change in the circumstances, we need to embrace a new paradigm, new business models, moving away from linear to circular business models, circular and regenerative business models. Because in our last comment on this, in our you know, in our prevailing system, what we've been doing is we've been externalizing many impacts for a very long time. So, you know, this sort of this idea of externalities, whereby, you know, in addition to the costs of the producer and the customer, there are many other costs that are not currently paid by the producer or by the customer. So, you know, for example, if a company has a factory and it manufactures some goods, it's likely to emit CO2, and, you know, carbon emissions contribute to global warming. And at present, you know, the cost of that pollution, of those CO2 emissions, you know, they're not borne by the producer or by the customer, but they're borne by all of us, because these are costs that all of us have to deal with. So, you know, it's an externality, and for a very long time we've been overlooking these externalities, and really that's why now we see ourselves in a situation where, you know, these external indirect impacts, which we've overlooked for so long, now they're of critical importance. We see it in, you know, the risk report saying these are the top issues, and you know, we've been exceeding planetary boundaries for in a lot of these areas. That's why you know, that's why they're now of critical significance. That's why we need a new change. That's why natural capital is now of fundamental importance. That's why companies can no longer carry on with the older approach, because the situation has fundamentally changed. Let's go on to the next page. Okay, I'm going to go through these last slides quite quickly, just to see if there are any questions. So integrated reporting, as we said, it focuses on value creation. I explained in one sentence, it's about value creation and destruction for investors and other key stakeholders. Okay, next slide. Okay, let me look at the situation in Turkey quickly. So, as I said, in terms of sustainability reporting, there are around 200 companies in Turkey that are now publishing reports on a regular basis around their sustainability performance and impacts. Actually, we as KPMG Turkey, very soon now we'll be publishing our first sustainability report about our performance and impacts. And I said in just the last couple of years, integrated reporting in Turkey has become important. On that slide, you can see just the examples from some of the Turkish companies that are publishing integrated reports, such as Garanti Bankası, Çimsa, TSKB. Okay, let's go to the next page, please. In terms of integrated reporting, so integrated reporting has become very popular in Turkey in the last couple of years. There's around 40 companies that are published. There are around 40 integrated reports that have been published. Around 20 companies. I think that's been changing very rapidly, actually. So it's more like 20 companies now that have published integrated reports. A lot of the main banks in Turkey do, and a lot of the other leading companies in Turkey are now, have this firmly on the radar. So this is a growth area. Okay, next page, please. These are some findings from a KPMG publication, KPMG Turkey publication on integrated reporting in Turkey. It's something that we did with ACCA and also ERTA, and so that's a report you can find on the internet. So if you want to learn more about the situation in Turkey, you can look at that. Okay, next page, please. And summary. So let's go to the summary page then. Next one, please. This is the next and last one. The previous slide, please. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so as I've been saying in this presentation, then sustainability is critically important to all of us, to companies and people everywhere, and we're faced with issues, some issues that are can be like sort of sudden shocks. So we've had the example of COVID, which we said the science makes clear the root causes were driven by unsustainable practices, and it resulted in a sudden shock to the system, to the world, whereby an infectious disease spread rapidly around the world. We've all seen the implications. So we can see how some of these issues can happen very, very quickly. But then we see there's also these sort of these problems that are sort of building in the system over time, such as with carbon emissions. So since the start of the Industrial Revolution, we've been emitting more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and they've been building up in the atmosphere and in the Earth's systems, in the oceans. The oceans are becoming more acidic as a result, and in other parts of the Earth's systems. And these are sort of they're building up gradually over time, but then they increase the chance of a sudden shock to the system. So we said COVID was a sudden shock. We're seeing more and more extreme events around the world, such as unprecedented weather events in Australia, California, Siberia, the Arctic, places like this. So there's a combination of sudden shocks to the system and gradual stresses that are building up. So basically how, we cannot continue with sort of the old systems. We need new systems. We rapidly need to transition to new systems, to renewable, to solutions that are renewable, circular, regenerative, and restorative. So basically, what we mean there is we need to rapidly move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. The good news is the price of renewable energy, the costs are reducing dramatically. So for over 60% of the world's population, solar and wind are now cheaper than fossil fuels, and the prices are continuing to decrease rapidly. So we need rapid implementation and scale up of renewable solutions. Also, we need to move from linear to circular models, so that we need fewer new resources, virgin materials in the first place, so that we need less production that we can reuse and repurpose materials many times. There's less losses from the system, and and then we need major focus on restorative, regenerative solutions, because the scale of degradation, of environmental degradation, is such that we also need to restore a large part of what we've damaged in recent decades, because when we think of solutions to deal with climate change, for example, our most cost-effective solutions are natural solutions. So for example, the world's rainforests, the world's mangroves, soil, the oceans, they're already doing a large part of the work for us in dealing with global warming, because they're currently absorbing the majority of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And so, a big part of contributing to the solution is preserving the natural assets that we still have, forests, mangroves, and the like, and also helping with the restoration of a lot of the degraded landscapes, so that they're able to start removing a lot of the carbon emissions from the atmosphere. So we also need these restorative solutions, because it's not enough to just reduce our emissions. We've been pumping billions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So we also need solutions that are going to remove much of the excess CO2 in the atmosphere. Natural solutions can be an extremely cost-effective part of that solution. Then there are lots of sort of artificial new technologies that are coming through that are currently expensive, but the costs are coming down. So there are these sort of artificial carbon removal technologies that are coming through that will be more cost-effective in the next few years. So we'll need a combination of those, but we need it in addition to the natural solutions. It's not going to work. We need the natural solutions as the starting point, and then to sort of supplement the job with these new technologies. And so we saw how the top risks to the economy and humanity, they're complex, they're interconnected, they're sustainability related, and really, we stand now at a sort of pivotal moment in human history, because to a very large extent, we already have the solutions for driving the change that we need. A lot of these solutions, some of them are still in quite an early stage, haven't been deployed at scale yet, but we have many of the solutions already, but we really need to rapidly implement them and scale them up. And so it is quite exciting to see sort of the potential for how we could move to a much more sustainable economy by embracing the new technologies. But it's also clear that we're at a really risky time in human history, because the risks facing us are currently severe. We've seen the example of COVID. We really need to act very, very quickly now to make sure that we have a breakthrough, a global breakthrough, and not a global breakdown. So what we do now in the next few years will determine the future trajectory of life on Earth for the coming decades, in this century, and for the next generation. And we all have a role to play here, from the individual to the company to country level. These are the top issues facing all of us. We all need to be a part of the solution. And the last quote there is from Jeff Bezos. He's the CEO of Amazon, the largest company in the world. He's also the world's richest man. And he says there, climate change, the biggest threat to our planet. We can save Earth. It's going to take collective action from big companies, small companies, nation states, global organizations, and individuals. Earth is the one thing we have in common. Let's protect it together. And with that thought, I'll leave you. So thanks very much. If anyone has any questions, happy to take them. But I know we're probably about done on time.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your valuable insights on this very important topic for us. So if you have any questions, we can take your questions now.
Esra, are you going to? Okay, well, there's probably a lot of information to take on board there. But I think, are you going to? So please feel free to share the presentation with the students, and yeah, people are very welcome to contact me if they have questions or ideas. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, so people are welcome to do that. And I think we'll be collaborating again soon on some other steps. So I'm very looking forward to that as well. Yeah.
Yes, and also we haven't made the announcement yet to our students, but we talked about a little bit in our courses that we will collaborate soon, and we will have another workshop in the nearest within 1 month nearly, and later on we can set the time together with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm very happy to. Great. Okay.
Thank you very much. This was really nice. It was really comprehensive. I think our students would need a little bit of time to just digest everything. But I think it showed quite a lot that we also talk about in classes, but how important it is that we should focus on. One maybe very quick small question for our students. How should they prepare themselves for this future businesses, where the focus will be sustainability?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, and I understand your students, now have the option to study some sustainability at your university in sort of your current courses, and I think sort of the new syllabus. So this is great. This is great. So I certainly encourage people to take if there are any like elective courses around sustainability. I think that would be very good. And we also take students on sort of internships, sort of from time to time, to sort of get some practical experience of working on some of our projects and initiatives. So there can also be some opportunities there for interested students to get some sort of first-hand experience. So this might be another thing that people want to consider. So they're two sort of immediate things that come to mind. And yeah, people are welcome to contact me or other people in our team, if they're interested. But that's right. So I think everyone has a role to play, and these issues, they're gaining enormous momentum now, and they're only going to become more important. Increasingly, what we're seeing, and what we'll see a lot more of, is a lot more integration. As I said, basically, as sustainability has been moving from sort of towards business critical. In the early years, a lot of companies saw it as a nice to have, and so often it was sort of addressed through one part of a business. But in recent years, as it's become increasingly clear that these are business critical issues, we're seeing a lot more integration across functions, across businesses. So I think we can also expect to see this in terms of disciplines. So that means that people that study other subjects, engineering or other subjects, I think every area needs to think about, well, how is this area contributing towards the sustainable goals? How can it contribute? Because these are issues that affect all of us, and we can't sort of, none of us sort of can live in a bubble oblivious to these issues. So there's also scope for more integration.
Mehdi has a question, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Yes,
first of all, I want to send my regards to our professors and our webinar's guest, Mr. Richard, and other participants. Thanks for all the information you shared with us. The question that I have is all about the new entrepreneurs that want to enter to the stage of business, how they can obey the sustainable resilience in case of bouncing forward and protecting the world and earning profits simultaneously. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think there's also a big movement towards sort of a lot more integration, a lot more sort of focus on addressing a business's purpose. There's sort of we're moving away from a business being set up just to achieve a profit, but it also needs to sort of achieve a profit, and it should have a purpose whereby the business can show how it's contributing to these global priorities in a profitable way. Think of like Tesla, for example. Tesla's purpose is to accelerate the world's transition to a sustainable car industry, with rapid sort of scale up of electric vehicles. So I think I'd just say that for any new venture, I think it's good to sort of identify what is the new venture's purpose. How can a new company contribute to helping address these top issues that are facing the world? These are top of issues facing all of us, and I think the companies that can show they have a clear purpose, they're the ones that are going to stand out and benefit, stand to benefit from customers, from investors. So I'd encourage clear focus on purpose and alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I think.
Thank you very much.
I think we have another question from Aysu. She says she's agree with sustainability and sustainable development, but when you look at the current situation that our world is in, do you believe that we will be able to implement these changes in time? She says.
So, I mean, as I said, we really are at a critical juncture now with these, you know, the scale of the challenges that we're faced with. I see enormous momentum, and just in the last couple of weeks, you know, there have been important, you know, net zero commitments, you know, from sort of China, from Japan, South Korea. You know, assuming Joe Biden becomes the next US president, he's committed to take the US back into the Paris Agreement, and also, you know, they have a net zero focus. So it's likely that by the start of next year, we'll have the US, the EU, and the UK, which already have commitments, China, Japan, South Korea, with a sort of a, you know, a clear focus on net zero. So this is sort of another example of how we're seeing, you know, momentum starting to build up. And I think as so this is good. I think as the issues are becoming, you know, more acute, more visible to people, like, you know, fires in California, Australia, people realize that this is a problem we need to deal with now. This is also increasing the momentum, and this will intensify because, you know, we know, unfortunately, you know, we can expect more shocks like COVID in the next few years. So I think this is only going to accelerate the demand for change and implementation. So these are the sort of these are good things on the good side, but you know, we have a lot of really major issues that we need to contend with. So, you know, well, yeah, the stakes are high, but I think, you know, we all have a role to play in helping to move us onto a sustainable trajectory.
And also she says, what will be the biggest challenge in our way, in your opinion?
Biggest challenge? As an individual or as a company, or?
She says, in your opinion. I think your individual opinion, she asks.
Well, I mean, I think with sustainability, you know, essentially, it requires a new paradigm where we need to, you know, move from this short-term focus. And I think, you know, we're genetically hardwired to have a short-term focus, you know, and it's served us very well in the past because, you know, people were able to focus on sort of not being eaten by large predators because they could focus on a danger that was right in front of them. And, you know, with sustainability, you know, these issues are very different. These are complex, interconnected risks, things that, you know, whereby we have to consider not just what's right in front of our eyes, but we have to consider, you know, a broader system. We need to look at longer term impact. So I think that the hardest thing is to sort of is that paradigm change, because that doesn't come instinctively to us. Great. Okay, I think I'm going to have to leave it there because I've got another call coming up and need to get ready for. So it was great talking to everyone. I'm looking forward to the next interactions, and yeah, people are welcome to contact me via LinkedIn, etc., for other discussions.
Thank you very much for your great contribution, Richard. See you in the next webinar.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.